It's June, and the train runs the Landeck to Imst line through the Ötztal region, the most famous area for alpine pasturing, where the mountains still glow gold from the last sun before shadow comes and steals the day. And I hear. Can I hear? Far, so far I'm not sure it's real, whether I'm already dreaming. I hear bells. Not many, just one, a cow, ringing. The first cow of the ascent. And with that one bell, that one old, familiar sound, all the memories come back, all the years, all the summers. I'm a boy again. No, not really, but I remember what it was like. I'm back in another summer, perhaps 30, 40 years away. I see the cows, brown and white, with great heavy bells around their necks. Bells so heavy the cows must lower their heads, make music with every step. They go up the mountain. This is the Alp Ascent, the ascent of the herds to the higher pastures for summer, for 5 months or 6. The train slows, and I can see, yes, I can truly see, the cows, 100 perhaps, or 200, on the road, on the way, accompanied by farmers, by herders in traditional dress, dark green suits, with feathers in their hats, with great sticks, with wooden whistles. The bells ring, many bells, different tones, different sizes, blending into a melody that isn't melody, but life itself, pure, ancient, eternal life. And suddenly I'm there. Not on the train anymore, but with the cows, with the herders, right in the middle of this process. What my life was before the train, before the railway. The air smells of grass and animal hide and mountain air, salt mountain air. The sun warms my back, so warm I'll sweat. But that's good, that's right. And the bells sing a song older than words, older than people, older perhaps than the mountains themselves, a song that began with the Alps themselves. I know these bells, each has its own tone. The largest, on the lead cow, it hums deep and resonant like an old church bell. The others, the smaller ones, they tinkle like little bells, like New Year's Eve and Christmas morning all together. But all together, they make a harmony, perfect, without dissonance, without fault. It's like a symphony, composed not by people, but by time itself, by centuries of tradition. Feel how the earth gives way beneath my boots. Not hard like stone, but alive, damp with morning dew and with spring water running through the meadows. With each step I hear my hooves, no, my boots, sink into the soft earth, rhythmic, like a second pulse alongside the bells. The herders beside me, they walk with that same calm, that same trust in their legs, as though they're not climbing these mountains, but simply breathing with them. And I see the first cow close ahead, its white and brown patches gleaming in the light, and I hear it breathe, heavy, steady, and I feel this is no burden to it, this is no effort anymore. This is homesickness, this is longing, this is the blood calling itself back home. The herder, yes, it was an old woman, with a voice like gravel and smoke. She showed me how to touch the animals, not with fear, not with force, but with a kind of understanding, as though you were speaking a language deeper than words. She laid her old, sun-browned hand on the side of a cow, and the beast relaxed, lowered its great head, trusted. You mustn't show that you're afraid, she told me then, her eyes fixed on the mountains. The animals, they smell your fear the way you smell flowers. You must trust yourself before the cow can trust you. This isn't work, it's a promise. A promise a herder makes to her herd, year after year, mountain after mountain. And I remember, or I dream remembering, how I hear those words right then, in that very moment, here, in the ascent, in the heat and in the scent, and in the overwhelming presence of all these lives climbing the mountain together. The train pulls me from my dream. Or is it a dream? The cows are past, they vanish behind us. The road is empty again, only dust they've stirred up. but the bells still ring in my ears, not physical anymore, not external, but in my memory, in my heart, where time moves differently. And I understand. That was the Alp Aufzug, as it always was, as it probably still is, as it will always be in my memory, so long as I draw breath. I think of the work behind this ascent, weeks of preparation. The barns had to be cleaned, the upper pastures inspected, the salts and medicines made ready. Every cow had to be checked, her hooves, her udder, her eyes. And then, on that one day in June, when the snow above has finally melted enough, they all gather. The herders in their traditional dress, with feathers in their hats, as they've done for 100 years. The lead herder, yes, sometimes it was a woman, with her knowledge of the mountains. And the cows, calm, as though they knew this way already, the way their mothers walked, and their mothers before them, generations back. This is not a story of people I met, not a story of strangers. This is a story of myself, of my own life, of my own journey passing me by like cows going up the mountain, slowly, making music with every step, with great weight, with great meaning. The Alp Aufzug, that is me, ascending, higher and higher, homeward, upward, to the pasture. The ascent takes many hours, sometimes half a day. The cows don't hurry. They go in a rhythm older than people, older than the Alps, perhaps. One cow in front, the lead cow, who knows the way. The others follow, calm, trusting. The herders walk on both sides with their sticks, sometimes singing, sometimes whistling, old shepherd songs, songs no one else sings except here, on these paths, at this yearly ascent. And I hear these songs still, or do I remember hearing them before I left? The boundary between memory and dream is fluid here, on this train, in the night. Along the way there are rest places, spots where the cows drink, where the herders pause. And in those moments, time doesn't matter. The mountains look at the cows and know, this is my rhythm. These are my children coming up. This is how it should be. The mountain blesses the Alp Aufzug, because the Alp Aufzug is a prayer of people and animals together, seeking summer. I see the Alpine hut before my eyes, a simple building of wood and stone, built perhaps centuries ago. Up there on the Alp, where it's quiet, where the air is thin and clear, the herders will stay there with the cows for 5-6 months. They'll make cheese, that famous alpine cheese that tastes like the mountains themselves. They'll milk the cows twice a day with their hands, the way it's always been done. And the cows will be happy on the green pasture in summer, free from the dark stalls of winter. And I, in my dreams, I'm also on the Alp. I'm small again, young again, part of that world that modern Austria has nearly forgotten, but not quite. The Alp Aufzug, it's still done. Everywhere in the Alps, where there are pastures, where there are cows, this ascent still happens. And whoever sees it, whoever truly sees it, not just with the eyes, but with the heart, understands this isn't simply farming. This is tradition. This is prayer. This is the story of the Alps, still breathing. And when I open my eyes, and I don't know when that was, when exactly I'd closed them, I'm back on the train, and the line to Imst is nearly done. The landscape hasn't changed, but I have. And I'm heavy with sleep and with memory, and I'm peaceful. I've come to rest. The train carries on. The wheels rattle. Clack, 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 clack. And the bells still ring, in my ears, in my dream. The cows climb on, ever upward. I climb with them, into the Alps, into the heights, into sleep, into memory. The bells grow softer, yet they ring on, gentle, soothing. Like a lullaby, the Alps themselves are singing. And I'm surrounded by bells and memory and mountain, by the warmth of the animals, by the scent of grass, by the love of a tradition that never dies. And I sleep at last coming home, back on the Alp, where I always belonged. The music pulled me into the past this evening, traveling from Monte Carlo to Ventimiglia along the French Côte d'Azur, where the sea tells stories all night long in dark ink and moonlight. It was a small, delicate song coming from somewhere on the train, perhaps a radio from someone's room, perhaps someone's phone with music. Debussy, the girl with the flaxen hair, this beautiful, sad melody. And this song, it opened me like a precious flower, and I went back, years back, to someone I met long ago. A dancer. A woman who once danced on the great stages for the whole world. I met her on a train. Not this modern one, no. On a French train. Was it the Nice Express? A very long time ago. I was younger then, still had hope in me, still had questions. And the world was different, full of possibilities, full of promise. And she sat by the window, almost motionless, and looked out to sea, the Mediterranean, dark blue, almost violet in the evening sun, the last sun of the day. And her body, even sitting, even in silence, carried incredible elegance, a natural grace, an old knowledge of beauty and form. A body that carries stories, hundreds of them. A body that knows what beauty is, what effort is, what pain is, what triumph is. She was old already, perhaps even older than I am now, but she was still beautiful, still glowing, not because she was young. Her face had 100 wrinkles. Her hands were no longer the hands of a young dancer, but because she had lived. Because she had lived completely, with every muscle, with every heartbeat. I didn't ask her right away why she sat that way, why her eyes were so knowing, so deep, like two old wells. But after a while, she came nearer. She wanted to talk. She told me about her career as a ballet dancer. 40 years long. 40 full years. In Paris, in Nice, in Marseille, everywhere in Europe where one danced. Dancing on the great stages of famous opera houses, La Scala in Milan, where Verdi had his works performed. The Palais Garnier in Paris, the most majestic opera house in Europe. Dances of Giselle, that tragic ballet about love and loss. The Nutcracker at Christmas time. Don Quixote with its quick, brilliant movements. Her body was an instrument, a work of art, a door to other worlds, to dreams, to beauty that is almost otherworldly. But then, she said, and her voice grew quieter, became a whisper. But then the body came to a halt. Injuries, a torn Achilles tendon, a fracture in the foot that never healed properly, arthritis, age. Gravity itself grew stronger. Suddenly I could no longer. Suddenly I had to stop. At 40 years old, only 40. My whole life, everything I was, everything I could do, all my dreams, gone. Just gone. Like taking a bird's wings and expecting it to live, to be happy. She showed me her hands, still beautiful, still elegant, with long, slender fingers, with the quiet grace of decades of patience and discipline, but with clear signs of time, with arthritis, with the scars of life and dance, with the pain that life brings. That is the worst part, she said, and her eyes suddenly grew wet, but shining, but smiling, as if she were comforting herself. Not the physical pain. That is hard enough, yes, but you get used to it. But the feeling of emptiness, of loss of identity. Who am I without dance? Who am I if my body, which was my whole being, which was my artwork, no longer functions? What do I do with this body that can no longer dance, that can no longer do what it always did, what it did its whole life? I listened, not speaking, just present, just my heart open. And she told me more. After the end of dancing, it was hard, very hard. Depression, lostness, deepest, darkest pain. She didn't know who she was without the stage, without the music, without the applauding hands. Year after year passed in gray, in nothing, in quiet despair. She sometimes thought, well, but then came a moment, a turning point, a small grace, a light. She was in an old library in Marseille, a library with high ceilings and dusty shelves, and she happened to read a book about gardens, a large book with beautiful pictures of gardens from all over the world, Japanese Zen gardens, French palace gardens, English wildflower meadows, Italian herb gardens. And suddenly, as if struck by lightning, by a revelation, suddenly she understood something deep, something that was waiting for her. A garden is also a dance, she said to me, and her eyes lit up, shone, lived again. Only slower, much slower. The flowers dance with the wind, the trees dance with the seasons, slowly, while months pass. The roots dance below the earth with water. The butterflies dance over the flowers. The sun dances over everything. Everything dances. Only when you grow older, when you are injured, when you are broken, then the music must grow slower. That is not less dance. It is not inferior. It is just a different dance, a deeper dance. And since then, she said, since then, I live with gardens. I live in gardens. I live as a gardener. I became a gardener. I make small gardens, in large pots, in wooden boxes, in my grandmother's old basins, everywhere I live. I plant flowers and herbs and small trees, indoor trees, roses, lavender, basil, small lemon trees. And I watch them for hours, how they dance with the light, the morning light, the noon light, the evening light, all so different. How they dance with the season, with the changing of the seasons, with life, with rain, with sun, with wind. And I dance with them, very slowly, very gently. But I still dance every day. And it is enough. It is more than enough. It is everything. She showed me a small, yellowed, precious photograph. A garden, incredibly beautiful, full of colors and forms, full of life, full of movement, even in stillness. Roses in red and white and pink, lavender in deep violet, small statues, perhaps a woman, a goddess, a fountain in the middle. This is my new stage, she said, and she smiled the smile of someone who has finally found peace, who has found grace. My new theater, my new opera house, and the audience are the birds that sing, the butterflies that fly, the people who walk past and marvel, without knowing why they suddenly feel beauty, without knowing why tears come. They don't see that a dancer is dancing there, but I know, and that is enough. It is everything. And now, on this train, with this music, with Debussy coming through the window, I am back with her. And I see her body, not young, not flexible as 40 years ago, but shining, full of peace, full of acceptance. And I understand what she told me then. There are many ways to dance, many stages, many musics, and the slowest music is sometimes the most beautiful. The train goes on, along the coast, and the music plays on. Debussy, this gentle, sad, beautiful song, and I imagine a woman in her garden, watering slowly, or touching a flower, or sitting and watching. Her movements are dance, her hands are music, and the sea still roars like applause for this woman who still dances, just not on the stage anymore, but on the earth, in the garden, in life itself, slowly, beautifully, warmly. I met the Old Violinist on the line from Villach to Klagenfurt in Austria, where the mountains speak the last word, where the landscape is so beautiful it could be music. It was autumn, and the leaves were gold and red and brown, amber-colored, and the train traveled through these colors like through a painting being made, like through a dream. He sat with two large old cases, not suitcases for travel, no, black cases full of music, full of memory, full of life. He was very old, certainly 80 or more, perhaps 85, with white, fine hair like snow, and his face had 100 lines, 100 wrinkles, 100 small stories carved into it. And his hands I knew even without knowing them. The hands of a musician, unmistakable. Long fingers, narrow as branches, with joints large from decades of work, from thousands of concerts, from a whole life devoted to the instrument. But his eyes were bright, still glowing, still hungry almost for the world, for music, for the sound of things. He showed me one of his cases. "My violin," he said, and his voice was quiet but clear, like a violin itself. "My first violin. This is a Gagliano from the year 1720. Very old, very precious. A work of art built by master hands, hands that have long since become dust. I have had this violin for 60 years, since I was young and had hope, and the world lay before me like a great concert, and I was the violinist, and everything was music." He paused, his gaze grew distant, looked into the past. "Today I am traveling to my final concert." Final concert. The words sat between us like a bird, a heavy bird. I didn't ask, I simply waited, and he spoke on as if following a melody only he could hear. "I have been a violinist my whole life long. Orchestras in Vienna, the State Opera Orchestra, orchestras in Munich, chamber ensembles in Berlin, concerts in Paris and Zurich and Venice. I played everywhere in Europe, carried my violin like a child, like my heart. Grand halls, intimate halls, almost palaces of kings, halls with red carpets. And people, thousands of people, hundreds of thousands, listened, sat in silence and listened, and I was a servant of music, only that, a simple, humble servant." He smiled, a sad smile. "That is all I ever wanted to be. That has been enough." "But now," he said, and his voice grew heavier, "now I am too old. The body doesn't know that the heart still wants to play. The fingers no longer strong, no longer fast, no longer reliable. The arm no longer strong enough, no longer fast enough. The ear's still good, better perhaps than before, finer, more sensitive, can hear more. But the hands cannot keep up. The hands cannot follow what the heart hears, what the heart wants to play. And that is pain. That is real pain, genuine pain. A musician without strength in his hands, that is no longer a life. That is a dying." "This concert," he said, and his gaze grew distant again, back in time, "is in Klagenfurt. A small concert hall, certainly 100, 150 seats, maybe 200. Not large, not famous, not like the State Opera in Vienna or the Residenz in Munich, or the grand halls where I played for thousands of people with orchestras, But that is my hometown, where I grew up, where my parents were, poor people but loving, where I learned violin from my grandfather, who was also a violinist, whose father was also a violinist. A whole family of music, a whole tradition, generations. And I will play the suite, the Bach suites, all six suites for solo violin, these masterworks. That I owe to life, to music, to God perhaps, to the universe that created me as a musician. All these years, all these 60 years since I had this violin, all these thousands of concerts, all the nights in trains like this one, I have played for others, for audiences, for fame perhaps, for money, for love of music. Now I play for myself, for the last time, to say goodbye, to give thanks. The train went into a tunnel, and everything became dark, pitch black, total darkness. But I could hear, not with my ears, no, with my heart I could hear. I could almost hear, I could feel, I could sense the music. The Bach suites, this incredible, heavenly music, the music of the spheres. And when we came out of the tunnel, back into the autumn light, the old man was still. His eyes were wet, but his smile was not sad, almost satisfied, fulfilled, peaceful. 60 years, he said after a long while of silence, and his voice was quiet as a whisper. 60 years I have played this violin, lived with this violin, loved with this violin. 60 years, half a century, thousands of concerts perhaps, 5,000, 10,000, I don't remember anymore. Millions of notes, millions of tones, millions of dreams gone into the music. And now I travel to my last concert, to the end. That is strange, it is like when the end of a very long story approaches and you know the pages are fewer. You already see the end coming on the horizon, but you keep reading. You read slowly, you savor every page, every word, every comma, until the last page, and then the story is over, the book is complete. But the beauty, that remains. The beauty remains forever. He opened one of the cases, only a little, carefully, reverently, and I saw the violin. Dark brown, very old, almost black almost, with scratches and signs of long years, of thousands of hands that held it, of thousands, tens of thousands of bows that drew across the strings in concerts, in rehearsals, in quiet moments at home. And it was beautiful. Not because it was new or shiny or bright, no. Beautiful because it had lived, because it still lived, because it held music, real music in it, in its wood fibers, in its soul, because it had been touched by 1,000 hands, delighted 1,000 ears, perhaps moved 1,000 hearts, made 1,000 people weep, laugh, dream, hope. The power of music in an instrument. The train went slower now, ever slower. We were approaching Klagenfurt, the end of this journey. The end, perhaps, of all journeys. And the old violinist, he leaned his head against the window and looked out. The autumn landscape was incredibly beautiful. The mountains grew larger and nearer, majestic. The hills grew greener, deep green, and everywhere forest, dark green, like home, like memory, like love, like the song of an old heart. In an hour, he said quietly, his voice barely louder than the wind. In an hour, perhaps less, I will step out. I will take my 2 cases, my beautiful old black cases that carry my whole life. I will go to the concert hall, and I will play. Play until the music itself sleeps, until the dream takes over, until only the essence of music remains, the pure form, the immortal form, without body, only beauty. And slowly my eyes grew heavy. The rhythm of the wheels, it sounded like a violin. Da-dum-da, da-dum-da. Like an old melody, like a dream of beauty. And I could hear the music in my sleep, the Bach suites, an old violin, an old heart that still played, still loved, still thanked the world for every hour, for every concert, for life. And the train went on, and the mountains drew closer, and somewhere in Klagenfurt, a violin will play for the last time. And an old man will remember all the years, all the concerts, all the ears that listened. And the music will fly like a great bird into the night, into the sky, slowly, gently, beautifully. And I sleep. Sometimes, when the light falls just right on the pane, when the moon stands at a certain angle, when the night carries the exact right fragrance, a window can show you something else. Not just the night, not just the landscape whizzing past, but the past, the time that was. And on my travels, on some generic historical line somewhere between the seasons, somewhere between reality and dream, I came to know such a window that looks into the soul of time. The window looked like any other window. Nothing special, nothing that would call you to look at it. But it was winter when I first saw it, and when the light fell through the glass in a particular way, when the moon stood at a certain angle, I didn't see the night outside. I saw another place, a village, as it looked 100 years ago, perhaps even longer, with gas lights glowing golden and stone houses, gray and old, and people standing on a street watching as a train passed by. Just like this train, but older, much older, with different wheels, with different smoke. And I leaned closer to the pane, and I felt the cold of the glass and the warmth of my face. And between these two temperatures, images emerge. The glass, it isn't merely transparent. It's a membrane, a boundary between two times. And the stiller you sit, the less you breathe, the clearer the images become. It's like window magic, or no, window truth, as though the glass opens the ears of time and lets you listen to what's long since passed. People who no longer breathe still speak in the cracks of this glass, in the lights, in the reflections. I asked an older woman sitting beside me, who was completely still, "Do you see it too?" And she smiled, a smile that knew, that understood everything. And she said, "Yes, I see it. I always see it here, at this window, when the time is right." And she told me that she'd been watching this window for many years, that sometimes the images were different. Sometimes you saw spring, sometimes autumn, sometimes snow, and sometimes you saw people who no longer existed, people from her own life, from her own history. And she told me, with a voice so quiet I could barely hear it, that this, perhaps, is the only way to see the people we've lost, not as ghosts, not as grief, but as memory, as images in a glass through which we travel into the night, and the night travels through us. Her grandfather, she told me, her grandfather went to war and didn't come back. But at this window, when the light is right, she could sometimes see him walking towards the station with a suitcase, and in that particular way of walking that only he had, the way he carried his shoulders, the way he held his head. And through this window, she could say goodbye year after year, again and again. Even though he was gone, she could say, "I still see you. I remember. You still exist in this time that stands still." And she asked me whether I believe that it's possible, whether I believe that the dead can speak to us through windows. And I answered that I don't know what's possible and what isn't, but I know that love is possible, and that memory is possible. And when both come together in a certain place under certain light, then things happen. Then bridges are built between what is and what was, and what it will remain as long as someone still looks. I leaned my forehead against the window, and I concentrated, and I opened my heart. And there it was. I saw the past, like a thin veil over the present, and I saw people I'd never known, but whose lives, whose world was so real, so alive, that I had to weep. My breath fogged the glass, and when I pulled back, I saw that the image faded with my breath, and then appeared again with each new breath, a different image, a different time. It was like as though the window were breathing with me, as though I were breathing with the train, as though time were breathing with me and saying, "You are here, you live, you exist in this moment between all these other moments." I saw the way they loved, the way they lived, the way they died, all suffused with the railway, this old train that carried them all. I saw their faces, their hopes, their fears, and I also saw the small things, the ordinary. A child pressing his hand against the glass as the train passes by. A woman holding her headscarf because the wind is too strong. A man checking his pocket watch, verifying that the train is on time. All these details, they tell stories of people who were exactly as important as I am, as you are, as everyone sitting in this train. And when I leaned back, the image was gone. It was only the night again, only the darkness outside the window, only the modern world. But I knew now that it was there, always there, waiting, only for the right fall of light, the right moment to show itself again. The window, it wasn't magical. It was simply a kind of door into time, into the memory of all those who sat in this train before I came and who will come later. And the woman, she leaned her head on my shoulder and she told me nothing more, nothing at all. Only her presence told me that she understood, that she too had heard, that she also had heard the voices speaking through the glass. And we sat there together, both silent, both filled with this knowledge that we are not alone, that the dead still sit in the windows and travel with us. And I begin to understand that this window is not a window, but a portal, a gateway to all the times that have passed through here. And perhaps I too am sitting in another window, in another time, watching as this train passes by with people I don't know, but whose lives I experience in this brief moment, in this eternity between past and present. And now, as I travel through this winter night, as I lean against this window, as my hand touches the cold glass, The image opens again, slowly. Yesterday looks in at me, and I see everyone who was here, everyone who went, everyone who came, and everyone who will come. We all travel in this machine, travel through time, travel into eternity. And the window remains open, always open, between yesterday and today, between life and death, between hope and memory. And I am not alone, for everyone travels with me. The glass is cold, and the image is warm. And in that tension, in that difference, dreams emerge, visions emerge. The bridges emerge between worlds, between times, between what dies and what lives. And now I understand that every window can be such a window, every pane a portal. It only depends on how much you look, how much you open your heart, how much you're willing to see the truth waiting on the other side that was always there, only hidden behind the darkness, behind the glass, behind your own breath. And I sink down into these layers of time, sink deep, deeper still, into sleep, where all windows are open and all people travel together forever. The noise of the train, the clicking and the rattle, it sounds different tonight. It sounds like a name, like the name of an old locomotive that I saw as a child. On the line from Nördlingen to Donauwörth on a hot summer day, I met a machine that carried its own name like a person, like a soul, like a living memory of another time. The locomotive was called, as I remember, Hope or Loyalty. Sometimes I forget the exact words, but never the feeling, never the meaning. On its side was written the name in flowing letters, white on black, cut sharp, like an inscription on a monument. And when I read that name, I felt that this machine was more than just metal and wheels and steam. It was alive. It had a heart somewhere inside, where coal burned and water steamed, and the soul of this locomotive lived. The man who drove this locomotive, he was old, older than everything else on that line, older perhaps than the mountains. And his hands, they knew this machine, the way a pianist knows his keyboard, the way a lover knows his partner's skin. When the train passed over a certain bridge structure under an iron roof, the sound of the engine changed, became more melodic, became a song, and the old man smiled. Not a forced smile, but a smile that came from his soul. He could hear the locomotive's name. He could feel what it felt. They spoke to each other without words, only with this sound, this special tone that only an old machine with a name can make. And I watched that man, how he placed his hand so gently on a valve, not to adjust anything, no, only to feel, to understand, to hear what the machine wanted to tell him. And in that moment, I understood that this relationship was older than any person, older perhaps than the railway itself, that this man had driven with this locomotive his whole life, that they had grown old together had grown tired together, had loved together. I asked the old man, "Why does this locomotive have a name?" And he told me that all things that work long, that serve long, that wear themselves out for others, they deserve to have a name. A name is a form of respect. A name says you are important. You are not just a machine. You are someone. You have a life. You have a story. You have a purpose greater than your function. And this locomotive, it earned its name through years, through decades, through generations of men who fed it, who cared for it, who loved it, the way you love a friend. He showed me the scratches on the steering wheel. Each scratch, he said, is a story. This scratch here, that was when the locomotive jumped the rails in a storm 40 years ago. But it came back. It wanted to come back. And this other scratch, that was when a young driver, greener than grass, touched the steering wheel for the first time with trembling hands, and the locomotive led him, gently, safely, the way a mother guides a child's first steps on the rails. And this deep scratch here, my God, he said, that was the day I met my wife, and she was nervous, and she grabbed the wheel, and she said nothing. But I knew that she would travel with me forever. When we passed under the bridge, when the sound changed, when the music began, the old man told me that this locomotive, at this point, always gave off a special tone. It was as though it were singing, and he had learned to start the rhythm, to change the speed so that the song became perfect. Every summer, when he drove this route, when he passed under that bridge, with this machine that cried out his name, he heard the song, and his heart, it laughed like a child, understanding the world for the first time. And he told me that in the coming years, he would retire, that this locomotive would soon no longer travel, that it would go to a museum, or worse, be taken apart as though it had never lived. And I saw how his gaze sank into the distant horizon, and he asked me, not with words, but with his eyes, who will come after me? Who will touch the steering wheel? Who will understand the scratches? Who will hear the music? And I couldn't answer him, because there is no answer. There is only what is past. There is only memory, and hope that someone will preserve that memory. And now, as I sit here, as this train carries me, as the rattle and clicking continue, as the night passes by, I understand that this train too has a name. Or perhaps it has many names. Perhaps it changes its name with everyone who sits in it. For you, it's one thing. For me, it's something else. And for that old man, with his scratch-covered hands, it is called home, is called love, is called the only machine he ever needed to feel completely whole. I don't hear it, Or perhaps I simply don't hear it consciously, but I feel it. Somewhere, in the rhythm, in the sound, is its name, the story of its life, the tale of all the people who sat in it, all those it carried, all their dreams, their hopes, their despair, sewn in, burned in, etched into the soul of this machine, into the metal, into the coal, into the steam. And I think of the bridge, of the music that plays under the bridge, and I understand that every machine, every train, it has such bridges, such points where it sings, where the world hears it, understands it, loves it. And perhaps, I am also such a bridge for someone. Perhaps when I speak, when I laugh, when I simply sit and breathe, perhaps I hear a name, my name, being spoken by the earth, by the rails, by everyone who carried me and will carry me still. And that thought, it warms me, like the coal in a fire, like the heat that comes from inside a machine that has worked its whole life for others. And perhaps that is the greatest thing, the greatest gift, not to be recognized, but to be loved by those who know you, truly know you. Not your appearance, not your function, but your soul, your unique, irreplaceable soul. And as my eyes grow heavy, as the noise slowly turns to music, as I understand that I am that old man, and this train, my locomotive, I finally understand that this train, this old machine, it speaks to me. Perhaps not in words, not in sentences, but in something deeper, in the feeling that comes when two old souls work together, love together, grow old together. The train and I, we are not separate. We are one. Its scratches are my memories. Its rhythm is my heartbeat. Its name is my name. With each rattle, with each click, it says, I am here. I am still alive. And I carry you, not just with coal and steam, but with my name, with my soul, into the night, home, to you, always to you. And the name echoes on in my dreams, echoes on and carries me deeper still into sleep, where all names become one. This train I'm telling you of stops at no station. It's not this train I'm sitting in, but a train from my memory, on some generic nightline somewhere, at a time that isn't quite real. I once dreamed of this train, a train that only travels and travels, and lets the stations pass by like water, like light, like everything that fades. A train of freedom. The windows of this train, They showed a landscape that never ended, a land made of autumn, with leaves falling, slowly, as though time itself were slowing down, and lights flickering at stations where people stood waiting. But this train, it didn't stop. The people saw it pass. They saw the lights in the windows. They perhaps even saw you, saw your gaze, your wistful gaze. But the train, it didn't stop. Its mission was to travel, always to travel, without stopping, without resting, without drawing nearer to its destination. And you know, in that dream, I was happy, happier than I'd ever been. I sat by a window, and I watched the stations pass by, small and large, with names I knew and names I didn't know. Stations from my life, places where I'd loved, where I'd grieved, where I'd lived. And I knew that I would never get off, that I would never arrive, that the traveling itself was the goal. The movement itself, the music itself, that was all I needed. And that realization, that wonderful, liberating realization, made me happy. Because you see, on this train that stops at no station, there is no more hurrying. There is no destination to drive you forward, no fear of being late, no worry about arriving. There is only the rattle of the wheels and the darkness outside, and your thoughts growing slower, like the lights passing by, like the rhythm calming itself, slowing down until it becomes a heartbeat, a breath, the pulse of the earth. And your shoulders, they relax. You feel how the tension, the years that have pulled you upward, how they slowly drip, drip, like sand falling from a hole in a pocket. And with each drop, you grow lighter. With each click of the wheels, each single click, something falls away from you. A worry, an expectation, a lie you told yourself about who you should be, what you should achieve, when you should arrive. I remember a woman who sat in this dream train beside me, and she didn't speak, not a word, but I knew that she understood, perhaps better than I did. Her skin was cool, not cold, cool like morning dew, like a rose just beginning to breathe. And I wondered, where does she come from? Where is she going? But then I understood that the questions didn't matter. Not here, not on this train. She understood that we didn't have to go anywhere, that we were already where we should be. The train was our destination, the traveling, the image passing by, the night, the infinite night. That was an ending, and no ending at once. She took my hand, just like that, without question, and we sat there together in this motion, in this eternity. And I remember how the windows changed, slowly. At first, we saw cities, with lights, with life, with people who had to be somewhere. But the longer we traveled, the fewer stations there were, the emptier the landscape became. Not emptier, no, different, wilder, freer. Forests that opened up, lakes that glittered, mountains that leaned against the sky, and no road, no civilization, only the rails, only this one line that ran on eternally without stopping anywhere. And I understood that we hadn't boarded the wrong train, that this train was exactly the right one for the journey I needed. The woman leaned her head against the pane, and I saw her face reflected in the darkness, half transparent, half real, as though she too had already become part of the night, part of the train. And she smiled, very slightly, only with her eyes, and I understood that she'd been sitting in this train for a long time, always, that she wasn't passing through, that she belonged here, in this motion, in this place that is no place, and everywhere at once. And now, as I sit here, in this real train, in this real night, I finally understand that that dream wasn't really a dream. It was a memory of a truth I've known for a long time, but always forget again. The train that stops at no station, that's me. That's you. We travel, and the stations, with all their promises, with all their hopes, with all their disappointments, they simply pass by, like forgotten dreams, like fleeting moments that cannot be held. And you might wonder whether life has any meaning if you never arrive, whether it's worthwhile to travel if traveling is all you get. And the answer that I found in that dream was yes. It's worthwhile. It's more than worthwhile. It is everything. Because the traveling isn't the goal. No. But the traveling is life. The traveling is breath. The traveling is time passing and changing us and making us what we are. And if you stop traveling, if you arrive, if you come to rest, then you stop living. The movement, that's the secret. And the woman at my side, she knew that. I saw it in her eyes. She had long since given up arriving. She had long ago let go of fear. And because of that, she could hold my hand with a strength that didn't grip, but accompanied, with a tenderness that didn't hold fast, but let go. She showed me that you can travel together without clinging to each other, that you can be together without arriving, that you can love each other in this motion, in this eternal, gentle motion that never ends. And as the train carries me through the night, as the wheels click, as the lights pass by, I now understand that there is no destination. And that is the greatest relief, the greatest freedom. I don't have to arrive. I don't have to struggle. I just have to travel and accept the night and the lights passing by and the silence they leave behind and the woman sitting invisibly beside me, holding my hand, and slowly glide into this sleep that has no ending and no beginning, only traveling only motion, only the gentle, endless traveling, only the trust that the station is not the goal. And I close my eyes, and through the window, I can still hear the clicking, the rhythmic, soothing clicking that tells me, yes, you're still traveling. Yes, you're still alive. Yes, your heart still beats in time with the wheels, with the earth, with time passing, without judging, without demanding, without promising that you'll ever arrive. And that dream, that wonderful, impossible dream, it teaches me that arriving isn't what matters, that the goal isn't the goal, that you yourself, have been there all along, already arrived, here, now, in this motion, in this night, in the beating of your heart that breathes with the wheels and says, I am, I travel, I am. No more stations, no arrivals, no departures, only the eternal traveling, the endless dance between motion and rest, the woman at my side, the night around me, and my heart that finally is still. Slowly into the sleep of boundlessness. I'm on the Bamberg to Coburg line again, and this night, this cold winter night, with snow pressing against the windows, reminds me of a man I met at a small inn, an innkeeper just closing his house for the night, who told me a story I have never forgotten. The train moves slowly, and I hear the rattle of the wheels, and I'm back there, in that inn on a quiet street. The inn was called At the Old Post, and it stood in a tiny village on a little traveled road, almost forgotten. The innkeeper was old, not very old in years, but his eyes were old eyes that had seen much, wars, times of peace, the changing of the world. He wore a dark apron, and on that apron were written the signs of his life, stains of wine and beer, crumbs of bread, traces of tea and coffee, the stories of 1,000 evenings. His hands were like old wooden boards, warm but rough, the hands of a man who has worked all his life, hands that knew how to hold things. He told me he'd just sent out the last guests of the evening. Not really sent them out, but gently guided them, the way a shepherd guides his sheep home. Come, he said to them, with a voice that was warm and strong. It's time. It's time to go home, to your family, to your bed, to the place where you truly want to be. And they went, without complaint, without argument, because they knew that this man was right. He always knew when the time was right. He had a feel for it, like a musician who knows a chord precisely, like a doctor who senses that the heart has stopped beating. The room was now empty, filled only with the scent of the evenings, the smoke still hanging in the air like a ghost, the glasses still warm from the hands that held them, still warm from people now gone. And this man, this innkeeper, walked slowly through his house and switched off the lights, one by one, with a deliberateness that reminded one of rituals, until only the lights behind the bar remained burning. It was like a ritual, an old litany that he sang every night, without words, only with his movements, his tired but determined movements. He brought out a large book. It was his guest book, old and bound in leather that had patina. And he showed me the names. Names of people who'd been here 10 years ago, 20 years ago, more than 50 years ago. And some whose names rested in peace, people who never came back. But this innkeeper, he remembered every one. Not just the name, but the story. This man, he was a locksmith, and he always came with a certain beer, always the same, every Friday night, until he died. That woman, she always sang this special melody about the river and about love. She was a widow. Her husband was in the war. And that young man, he was in war, and when he came back, something in his eyes was different, something that never healed. He told me that the work of an innkeeper is not to serve, no, much more. It is to keep a window open, a window into people's souls. They come in with their burdens, with their worries, with their secret dreams. And when they drink a glass of wine at a table under this roof, then they forget for a moment that the world outside is dark, cold, dangerous. And when they leave, they carry that memory with them, that warm memory, like a fire in the chest. And they come back again and again, because they know that here is a place where they are welcome. And as he told me this, as the lights behind the bar glowed softly, as though the room itself were breathing, I noticed that I myself began to relax. This room, this empty room, became my room. And this innkeeper, this old, tired innkeeper, became my host for this precious night. And I understood that it wasn't about the beer or the food. It was about the feeling of being welcome, the feeling that someone knows that you are here. I leaned back in my chair and watched him, how he moved, slowly, as though each step mattered. He took out 2 glasses, both empty, both waiting, and set them on the bar, not side by side, but so that one glass looked at the other, like 2 people meeting each other's eyes, who understand without speaking. Then, slowly, very slowly, he poured wine from an old bottle without a label, and the wine flowed like color into water, dark red, almost black, and I smelled the years sleeping in that wine, the autumns, the vineyards, the hands that had picked it. And he told me that this wine came from a man who sat here for many years, and who every autumn brought his grapes and made his own wine in the cellar of this house. This man, he was an artist, not with colors, but with time, with patience, with the knowledge that good things take time. He died about 10 years ago, but his wine, it lives on, and everyone who drinks this wine drinks his soul, drinks his love, drinks the years he spent here, the years that he loved and that loved him. I took a sip, and the world changed. It wasn't just wine, it was a memory of a place I'd never seen, of people I didn't know, of autumns long past, but somehow still present, still warm, still alive. And I finally understood that the work of an innkeeper is not serving, it is preserving moments of feelings, of human warmth captured in a room, in glasses, in names, in an old book, in this special way of bowing your head and listening, truly listening. And now, here on the train, as the night passes by, as the cold fills everything outside, as the snow presses against the windows, I think of that man, how he closed his house, how he switched off the lights, one by one, until only warmth and silence remained. And I understand that this train too is an inn, a place where I can settle, safe, in warmth, under a roof, sheltered from the cold, and by someone who knows when it is time to simply be, simply to breathe, simply to exist. My hand on this table beside me is cold, and I place it on the window against the pane, and the glass is ice cold. But it lives. It lives because outside the world passes by, because outside there are people in houses who sleep, who wake, who dream. And I am here in this motion on this train, and I suddenly remember that the innkeeper at the end of the evening told me, he said to me, "You don't have to stay here. You must move on. But don't forget that there is a place here where someone knows you, where your name somewhere is written in a book." And that was the greatest gift an innkeeper can give a guest. The feeling that you are known, that you matter, that you exist, not just for this night, but forever. And I think, as the train rolls on, that I too, somewhere, leave a name behind, in the hearts of the people who travel with me, in the eyes of the conductor who saw me, in the voice of the station master who helped me. And perhaps, if enough years pass, if enough life is lived, if enough nights roll by, then I will also become that innkeeper in someone's heart, will become a host for a night that they need, will light the lights one by one, and will know how to listen, how to keep a window open into the soul of a stranger who doesn't remain a stranger. And slowly, slowly, I fall asleep, like a guest going home, carried by this train, this old post that carries me safely into the night, home. A delicate fragrance drifts through the ventilation of the train tonight on the Metz to Luxembourg line. It's the scent of flowers, or perhaps only the memory of flowers. It reminds me of a woman I met long ago, a flower seller who stood beside the Gare du Nord in Paris, and who showed me what beauty truly means, and how to share it with others without needing many words. It was spring then, and I was young and lost in that great city. I came out of the station, and there, right on the square in front of the entrance, stood this woman. She was small and stooped. Her hands were rough and red from work, but her eyes shone like the sky over Provence. She sold flowers, not in a pretty shop, but simply from a small wooden cart filled with roses and carnations and ranunculus and lilac and white blossoms whose names I didn't know. The fragrance was overwhelming, not a single scent, but a symphony of scents, layered one upon another like colors in a painting. It was the scent of life itself, of growth, of hope. I asked her, "Why do you set your cart right here, in front of this great station?" And she laughed, a deep, warm laugh that came from her whole body, and told me, "Because people arrive here from everywhere, and they are alone. They are tired. They are sad. Some have just lost someone, others have just found someone. And I am here to show them that beautiful things still exist. The flowers, they don't know that the day is dark. The flowers only know that they live. They only know that they bloom. She took a rose in her hand, and she showed me how to truly see a rose. Not simply to look at it, she said. See. See the way the petals open, slowly, each in its own time. Each petal is the same, and yet different. See how the scent goes from layer to layer, from outside to inside, like a secret slowly revealing itself. And that scent? That is the life of the rose. That is the time, the delicacy, the hope. It is the speed at which this rose grows and dies and is born again. It is the secret of nature. I took the rose carefully in my hand, and suddenly I understood what she meant. The rose was not heavy, but not light either. It was cool from the moisture of the cart, and when I touched the petals, I noticed they weren't velvet soft as I'd expected. They were firm, structured, taut with life, each petal a small work of art with fine veins running through it like paths through mountains. The scent, you only notice it when you bring the bloom very close to your nose. That scent is not simply sweet. It is bitter, too. There is a sharpness, almost resinous, mixed with something green, something alive. It is the scent of sun and earth and work all at once, a gift from the hands of someone who understood that a flower must not only be grown, but loved. The old woman stood beside me and laughed quietly, and she said, "Yes, now your heart sees, not your eyes. The rose tells you its whole story, where it comes from, how much longer it will live, what it needed to be so beautiful." She told me of each type of bloom in her cart, of each bunch with a different story. These red roses came from a farmer outside the city who sang while he cut them, and you can still hear that singing if you listen very carefully, an old farming song of work and love. These carnations, they come from elsewhere, but they remind me of celebratory moments, of weddings, of funerals, of all those moments when people mark life with flowers. And these white blooms here, they come from a house in Montmartre where an old woman grows them, as a memorial to her dead daughter who died 30 years ago. She showed me the stems, where little thorns sat, red and dangerous. "The thorns," she said, "those are important. The flower must protect itself. Without thorns, everything would take it, would crush it. With thorns, the flower says, 'I am delicate, but I am also strong. Respect me.' And if you are willing to allow the thorns, then you deserve the flower's beauty." It was like a parable for everything that life is, that beauty always has a price, that gentleness needs strength. She also told me of the different people who bought her flowers. The old man who came every Friday to take a rose for his dead wife. He would lay the rose on her grave at the cemetery. The young mother who bought flowers for her daughter to teach her that life is beautiful, that it's worth tending. The businessman who took the same white rose every week, sometimes for his beloved, sometimes as a prayer for peace in his heart. Each rose, the seller said, it has a journey. It begins as a dream in the farmer's mind, then it's born, grows, blooms, then it comes to me, then it goes to the person who buys it, and at the end, it wilts. But while it wilts, it still gives fragrance. The flower gives, even at the end of its life. I bought a rose from her, the most expensive I could afford, and as she wrapped it for me in old, browned paper, I heard her sing, quietly, an old song, in French. It was a song about spring and about loss and about the hope that returns when the blossoms fall, when winter comes, when everything grows dark. And the scent of that rose, as I held it, as I smelled the paper, the old rose, was the most beautiful thing I had ever experienced. More beautiful than any music, more beautiful than any poem. She told me before I left that flowers are not for the eyes. No, flowers are for the heart. And if you open your heart, if you truly listen, if you are willing to feel, then the flowers will tell you their stories. And you will understand that even in the darkest nights, there is still beauty. You will understand that a flower's scent is a message from another world, from a place where hope still exists. She also told me she had stood on that spot in front of the Gare du Nord for 40 years. 40 years! Every day except Sundays. And in that time, she watched the city change, the people change, the fashions change, but the flowers, they remained the same. Each spring, the same blooms came in the same colors, and the people, they still came. They still needed beauty. They still needed the feeling that it's possible to give someone beauty. That's why I'm here, she said. Every person deserves one moment of beauty per day, just one moment, a petal, a scent, a reminder that life isn't only work and sorrow, that beauty remains possible. I asked her, how do you do it? How can you stand here every day in the cold, in the heat, and show these people flowers, knowing they perhaps won't understand what you're offering them? And she looked at me with those glowing eyes, and she said something I have not forgotten in my whole life. Because I know that at least one of them, just one, will take this rose, will carry it home, will put it in a glass with water, and will wake up every morning and see this flower and will think, the world is not so bad. There are still beautiful things. Someone cares about beauty, even if the world has forgotten why that matters. She took my hand in her rough, old hand, and she pressed it, not hard, but with all the wisdom of 40 years in this place, 40 years full of flowers, full of hope, full of quiet wonders. That's enough, she said. That's enough to live. Here on the train, as I travel through the night, as that delicate fragrance reaches me, I'm back at that spot in front of the Gare du Nord. I see that little woman with her rough hands and her glowing eyes. She was selling not just flowers. She was selling hope. She was selling life. She was selling the memory that beauty is possible, that it is always present, and that every person who comes out of that station deserves that beauty, deserves to feel that life can be beautiful. And as my eyes grow heavy, as the fragrance wraps around me, like petals slowly falling, I sink slowly away to a place where flowers always bloom, where hope is always possible, where that warm, delicate scent carries me home, into sleep, into warmth, slowly like a petal, slowly home to you. The smell of old paper hangs in the air tonight, that fine, sweet scent that comes through the ventilation of the train on the Bonn to Remagen line. It reminds me of a man I met many years ago, an accountant with a wooden desk that didn't stand in any modern office building, but in a small village where time seemed to stand still, where people still knew what it meant to work slowly and to love that rhythm. This man, his name was Gregor, sat at his desk in a tiny office next to the town hall. He'd been the village accountant for over 40 years. 40 years he sat there, at that very table, writing down numbers. Not on a computer, no, that didn't exist then, or he wouldn't use it. No, he wrote by hand, with a fountain pen and ink that came from an old inkwell sitting on the desk like a shrine. The room always smelled of that inkwell, and of paper, and of the particular scent of much time passing. The desk itself was a work of art in wood, dark and old, and full of scratches and gouges. Each gouge, each scratch, was a story. One scratch was from his son, playing there as a child. Another was from when his predecessor had lifted the desk to repair the legs. And on the surface there were impressions from the inkwell and pen, where his elbow rested day after day, year after year. The wood was polished at the edges from 1,000 movements of his arms. The desk was like an old body, an old, dependable body. The man described how he would sit down every morning and touch the desk before he began to work. "Good morning, old friend," he'd say to the desk. And this wasn't madness, this was ritual, respect, a kind of prayer. The desk knew him better than any living person. The desk knew when he was tired, when he had worries, when he felt joy. Gregor showed me the 4 feet of the desk. Each foot was unique. One was a bit shorter than the others, another had a dent, and yet the desk stood perfectly level. Like a life, too, he told me. Not perfect, but in balance. That's the secret. Not perfection, but balance in spite of imperfection. The inkwell. I shall never forget that inkwell. It was green, a deep, old-fashioned green, and it was made of glass. On the top was a wooden lid that fit perfectly, as though carved specially for that very bottle. The man told me that this bottle had sat there for more than 50 years. It belonged to his father, who'd also been an accountant. And the ink had that deep black color, the color of damp earth, of soil and history. Sometimes, he said, he could still smell that this ink was from his father, because each person's ink has its own scent, a small signature, invisible yet present. He showed me a leather-bound book, large and heavy, sitting on a shelf next to his desk. It wasn't just any book. It was the book. The book in which he wrote every single transaction of the village. Every penny that came in, every farthing that went out. And his handwriting. It was beautiful handwriting, flowing and elegant and completely precise. No mistakes, not a single mistake in 40 years. I leafed through it a bit, and it was like a poem. The numbers, they sang on every page. It was as though I were reading the soul of an entire community. I asked him, "How do you do it? How do you write so long and so precisely without a single mistake?" And he smiled, a quiet, contented smile, and told me it wasn't about precision at all. No, it was about respect. He respected every penny that flowed through this village's accounts. He respected the people who'd earned that penny, and the people it was meant to serve. And that respect guided his hand. He also said, "If I made a mistake, I wouldn't do justice to the village, and I cannot do that. I will not." While I sat there, while he told me more, he opened a drawer. From that drawer, he took out a small box, and inside were pieces of old pens. Pen stubs, one might call them, but he called them something different. He called them his collection of thoughts. Each pen, each of these little stubs, had brought with it a special moment. One pen was the one he'd used when the war ended and the village was being rebuilt. Another was the one he'd used when his son was born. And yet another, That was from the pen with which he'd written the last page of the great book. It was like another way of writing a story. "This collection of pens," he told me, as his old hand stroked the small box, "is worth more than all the money in this village's accounts. These pens are my testament, not my legal testament, but my life's work, condensed into these small, worn objects. Each pen is a witness to my life, and when I die, someone else will find this collection, and perhaps that person will never know what these pens meant. But it doesn't matter. The meaning isn't in the information. The meaning is in the existence itself, in the fact that I was there, that I wrote, that I worked." He wrote very slowly. I noticed that, not because he was tired, but because he wrote each number with care. Pauses between the numbers, as though giving each moment time to become aware of itself. The 0, that needed a bit longer. The little hole in the middle, that had to be perfect. The 8, that needed time too. Those 2 circles, they had to feel just right under the pen. And the 3, that had an elegance that fascinated me. Each number was a song. "People think numbers are lifeless," Gregor said, as he took a fresh pen and wrote a number on test paper. "But that's wrong. Numbers are very much alive. Numbers are like people, each with its own personality. The 1 is strong and self-assured. The 2 is gentle and balancing. The 5 is... how should I put it? It's like a woman dancing. And if you don't respect those personalities, if you write them too quickly, too carelessly, then you lose their essence. You turn them into dead symbols on dead paper. And I cannot do that. I will not." And the scent of that ink, as I listened, as I watched him, that scent stole through me. A scent of steadiness, a scent of patience, a scent of love. Yes, of love for this simple, quiet work. Work that no one saw, that no one celebrated, but that held everything together. The village accounts, the numbers, the order, the history, page by page, written in that great book. That was his legacy, not in wealth, but in that precision, in that devotion. I sit here now, on the train, and this smell of old paper, this smell of ink, reminds me that there are still such people. People who love their work, not because it's famous, not because it brings much money, but because this work is their work, their own small, perfect world. And as the train travels, as I listen, simply listen to how the wind whistles over the rails, I find peace, a deep, quiet peace, like the peace in that office with the old desk and the green inkwell and the books that hold the soul of an entire community. And slowly, like ink seeping into paper, like time flowing over that desk, I sink into sleep, into the warmth of this simple, precious work, into this dream of order and love and respect for each number, for each page. The light grows dimmer as the train travels through the night, and it reminds me of a particular moment on the Wiesbaden to Mainz line. It was winter then, the middle of the 1960s, and I met a woman in my compartment who told me about her work at the cinema. She sat across from me, and as the lights of the station began to fade and the compartment grew dark, she told me her story. Her hands were small and delicate, and as she spoke, she moved them very slowly, as though she were still guiding people to their seats with her torch. She'd been an usherette at the large cinema in Wiesbaden. Every night she stood there, with a small torch in her hand, casting a thin beam of light through the darkness of the hall. She wore a dark skirt, black or very dark blue, and a blouse with a white collar. She wore a small badge, too, that would glint briefly when the film light caught it. Her voice was quiet, not whispering, but respectfully quiet, the voice of someone who knows she works in a sanctuary. She described the cinema foyers to me, red velvet seats, golden wall lamps, and everywhere the smell of popcorn and sweets. She told me it was never simply about showing people to their seats. No, it was more than that. She watched the people, saw how they came in from the cold winter night, freezing and tired. She saw the young couples holding hands, uncertain where to sit. She gently showed them a quiet place where they'd be alone. She saw mothers with their children, the children excited and barely able to sit still. She showed them seats where a child could easily reach the toilet if needed. And the lonely people, the elderly, the divorced, the ones who had no one. She found for them the best seats, seats where they could be right in the dream. There was an older man, she told me, who came to the cinema alone every Friday, always alone. He'd sit in the same seat, row D, seat 4, and he'd watch the film without moving, without breathing, it seemed to me. And I knew this man had no one at home, that his whole life happened in this cinema, in this darkening world. So I didn't just show him his seat. I'd sit beside him sometimes before the film started, just for a few moments, just to tell him that someone noticed he was there, that someone knew he existed. And his eyes grew wet, but he said nothing. He didn't need to say anything. The torch in my hand, it was like a small bridge between his loneliness and my attention. But the most beautiful thing, she told me, was the ritual of the film itself. When the lights began to dim, that was when the whole world outside the hall would disappear. The worries, the cold, the dirty streets outside, everything vanished. And her domain, her little kingdom with the torch, became a magical place. She was no longer merely an employee. She was a kind of spirit guiding these people to another land. A switch was flipped. The lights grew lower and lower, and with each moment less light, the air became different, warmer, safer. She told me of a film. She couldn't remember its name anymore, but she remembered the moment when the light began to sink. It was as though everyone in the hall held their breath. The music began, slowly, deeply, warmly. And as the image began to glow, as the cinema lights went completely dark, she saw the faces of the people in that dim light. A young boy, his eyes wide as saucers. An old woman, smiling. A man, leaning his whole head forward. And in that moment, in that one precious moment, she knew that she was doing something very important. She still stood there with her torch, but she switched it off. She didn't want to be intrusive. She wanted to be part of this moment, this magical second when the world outside ceased to exist. And in that moment, she told me, she felt her true work. She wasn't there to show people their seats. She was there to open a door to another place, a place where anything was possible, a place where time flowed differently, a place where tears and laughter were equally important. Every night, she said quietly, her voice growing thin with memory, when the lights began to dim, I felt a kind of responsibility that wasn't in my job contract. I felt that I held the fate of all these people in my hands. Not literally, but somehow spiritually. If I gave someone a bad seat, if I wasn't careful, if I wasn't sensitive, then I might steal from someone their only moment of safety in the entire week. And so, so the work became sacred for me. I didn't go home and say, I had a tiring day at work. I went home and said, I helped people today. I opened the door to another world for them. I asked her, which film was it? Which film carried that magic with it? She smiled and said, it doesn't matter which film. The film was only an excuse. The real secret was that moment between light and darkness. That moment when the hall grew dark, when people were freed from their worries, when everything became possible. She also told me that she sometimes saw the people again. They came back again and again, not always for the same film, but for that moment, for that wonderful, brief moment when the world stopped. She told me more of the years she worked there, of the films she saw 1,000 times because they showed the same films every night. Some films she saw so often she could recite the dialogue, but that wasn't sad for her, no. Each time the lights began to dim, it was like the first time. The magic was new each time. The hope was new each time. She knew every seat in the cinema, knew where the light fell best, where the view was clearest, where you felt safest. As I listened, as she spoke, it began to rain outside. The rain tapped gently against the train window, and I understood. I suddenly understood that this compartment too, this small, dark chamber, this too was a cinema. The windows were like a screen, the rain was like the music, and the woman with the bright eyes was the usherette, showing me the way to another place, a place where I was completely safe. Later, much later, she left the cinema. She married, moved to another city, had children. But she told me she still misses that moment when the lights dim. She misses the magic of it. And so, she said, she travels by train now. Because here too, in this dark compartment, the same magic happens. The lights dim, the world outside disappears, and you can travel to places where there are no roads. And as I sit here, and this train travels through the night, as the windows work like a screen, and the wind sounds like film music, I feel that I too am now in this cinema, in this compartment, where the lights slowly dim, where the darkness spreads, warm and comforting, like the trust of an usherette showing me my seat, into sleep, slowly, safely, home. The lights grow dimmer, 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 until only warmth remains. The rattle of the wheels has a peculiar rhythm tonight, and it reminds me of something very old, of an autumn evening many years ago, on the line from Ansbach to Nuremberg. I was young then, perhaps 10 years old, and traveling alone for the first time. The train window was open and cold air came in, but my heart was warm. The conductor had bought me a sausage beforehand, still warm in my hand, wrapped in paper. I ate it very slowly because I wanted to savor every bite. It tasted of mustard seeds and wood smoke, and something I haven't found since. There was a fair in one of the old towns, and the train moved slowly through the dusk. I could see the lights from far away, colored, flickering lights that moved in the darkness like living things. Not modern, you understand, not bright and white like today. No, these lights were warm and golden, some orange, some reddish. They came from light bulbs hanging on wooden frames and from lanterns filled with candles. These lights were alive. Some of them didn't even glow evenly. They flickered a bit, as though they were breathing. And as I watched them, I felt my heart beat faster. It had to be magic. It couldn't be anything else. As the train drew closer, I could hear the music. An old carousel organ, you see. One of those great carnival organs that sound different in every town. It played a melody I didn't know, but I loved it at once. Up and down, over and over. Clack, 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 clack. As rhythmic as the train wheels themselves. It was as though the organ were speaking with our train, keeping pace and welcoming us into that gleaming, dark carnival world. And that music, it wasn't loud, but it went right through me, down into my very chest. The train slowed, and I pressed my face to the window. There was a carousel, one with wooden horses gleaming in colors that don't exist anymore. Red, but not that bright red. A deep, soft red, like old silk. And the horses' manes were golden, faded gold that only shone when the bulb light fell directly on it. Around the carousel ran colored lanterns. Lanterns, I think that's what they were called. Round and puffy, in yellow and blue and green. They swayed a bit in the autumn breeze, and sometimes the light would flicker as the lanterns moved. It was like the blinking of some great sleeping creature. Everywhere smelled of roasted almonds, that sweet, spicy scent that still sits in my nose when I think of those days. And cotton candy, too, that impossible, unrealistic pink that you could touch, but that dissolved like a dream. There were stalls with sweets and toys, tiny wooden cars you could pull with a string, and dolls with cloth faces soft as dreams. An old man in an apron, his apron so stained with caramel and sugar you couldn't see the original color, stood at a stall twisting great rods with cotton candy on them. Over and over, slowly he turned the rod, and the pink cloud grew and grew until it was as big as a child. I saw people laughing, really laughing, with open mouths, not that careful smile I knew. Children ran with cotton candy in their hands, and their parents led them gently with the other hand. There were old women in dark dresses selling lottery tickets, and men in hats calling out prices. It was loud, but not shrill, a good loudness, a loudness that invited you to be part of it. I could see a young boy, perhaps about my age. He had a carousel horse you could take away tucked under his arm. It was green and red, and he held it tight to his chest as though he'd lose it otherwise. The train stood still now, and I could see nearly every detail. There was a stall with a shooting game, where you had to knock down lead soldiers with little pellets. A young man, perhaps much older than I, kept trying again. Shot and missed. Shot and missed. But he laughed, you know. He simply laughed, and the stall owner laughed with him. That was the true joy of the fair. Not to win, but to laugh together while trying. And the organ played on. Clack, 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 while the wooden horses made their endless rounds. Sometimes they sped up, sometimes they slowed, just as the music asked. On every horse sat a child gripping the mane and simply smiling and smiling. Their eyes were so large and so full of, yes, of trust. They trusted the horse, the organ, the fair, the whole world. I remember thinking then, people will always see things this way. It will always be like this. The organ will always play, and the lights will always shine, and everywhere there will be cotton candy and laughter. I couldn't imagine it ending. I couldn't imagine those lights, that warm, golden light, ever being different. The thought was so impossible that I drove it right out of my head. No, that was eternal. It had to be eternal. It was like part of me, a part that would always glow. And as I sat and stared, I was the happiest little person in all the world. It's strange how time changes everything. Those lights, perhaps they still exist somewhere in another town, but I've never seen them that way again. No lights have ever been so golden for me since then. No music has ever played clack, 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 clack in my heart the way that old organ did. And yet, when I hear that music in my memory, it's still exactly as warm and exactly as real as it was then. The conductor whistled, a long, peculiar whistle, and that was the signal to move on. The train lurched forward, and I felt a catch in my stomach. The lights began to grow smaller, slowly, but the organ played on, still clack, 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 clack. I leaned out the window as far as I could and looked back at that gleaming, glowing place. My hand. I remember how cold my hand was on the cold window frame, but my heart was hot. It was as though I were saying goodbye to something important, though I didn't know it was goodbye. The wind blew in my face and dried the tears I hadn't even noticed I was crying. Tonight, as I sit here and the train travels through the darkness, it's autumn again, you see. This rattle reminds me of that very rhythm, of that clack, clack, clack. And I see those lights again in my mind's eye. Not the same lights, no, but I feel their warmth. I feel that security, that trust the children had sitting on those horses, that love between parents and small hands. And I feel that I'm still that boy. Part of me still sits with an open window and stares at those golden lights. And the organ played then. It plays still when I hear it, and it's as though someone whispers to me. It was real. It truly was. The lights were real. The warmth was real. And as I listen, as the train rolls on and on, my eyes grow heavy. The rattle becomes a song. The darkness becomes warmth. And slowly, slowly, everything drifts away into sleep, where all the fares still glow, where I'm still 10 years old, and that clack, clack, clack will gently carry me into dreams. Clack, 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 slowly, silently, warm. The train carries on. Or does it start again? I don't know. I don't know how long I've slept, or if I've slept at all, or if all this is a dream that feels like reality. The night is still there, but it's changed. It's grown softer, lighter, as though it's slowly retreating, like a tide reaching its highest point, and now gently, very gently, ebbing back. And at the edge of the sky, far away, where the darkness is thinnest, I sense something, not light, not yet, but the memory of light, the promise of light. My compartment is still. The reading lamp still burns, casting its golden glow on the crumpled blanket, and my hands resting on my chest, light and warm. The train rocks me, as it has all night, da-dum, da-dum. And in this rhythm lie all the stories, all the voices, all the faces that accompanied me through the darkness. The bellcaster. I still hear her voice, deep and warm as the sound of her bells. Every sound carries a soul, she said, and I think of the bell struck for the first time and the tone it carries over the valley, over the mountains, over the years. A tone that never quite fades because it transforms into memory, into silence, into something felt, not heard. The forester, with his weathered face and boots full of forest earth. "The forest forgets nothing," he said. "Everything's connected. Everything gives and takes. And I feel this connection now, in this train that connects me to the night, and the night to the morning, and the morning to all that follows. A web of moments, fine and strong as the roots beneath the forest floor." The weaver, her dark eyes, her melodious speech, her fingers spanning invisible threads. "Every thread has its place," she said, "and this night is a pattern, woven from stories and silence and the rattle of wheels. A pattern you only see from a distance. But I see it now. I see the morning star shining in the threads. I see the path of life, winding, endless and beautiful." The astronaut, his distant eyes that once saw the earth from above and never quite returned. "You see no borders from above," he said, "only that glowing blue point in nothingness. And I float above this night, above all the stories and memories, and see no borders between them. They flow into one another, like the oceans that from above are a single sea, a single, endless blue." The glassmaker, with her amber curls and blue pendant, "You must know the right moment," she said. "The moment when glass opens, when it comes alive. And that moment is now. This moment between night and morning, when everything seems possible, when the world is still soft and malleable like molten glass waiting to become something beautiful." The bridge builder, his great hands, his stopped watch, "Connections are everything," he said. And this night was a bridge from yesterday to tomorrow, from waking to sleeping, from what was to what will be. And I stand on this bridge, looking both ways, grateful for both, for the darkness I've come from, and for the light that awaits me. The herbalist, her gentian blue eyes and hands that smelled of thyme. "Nature has a remedy for everything," she said, "and the night is her best remedy. Against the day's fatigue, against the mind's unrest, against the longing for silence. And I feel the remedy working, in my bones, in my breath, in the heaviness of my eyelids. Lavender and chamomile, and the scent of sleep that comes when you let it. And the night watchman, the last of all, with his lantern and black coat. The night protects those who understand it," he said, "and I understand it now. I understand that darkness isn't an enemy, but a friend. That it doesn't take, but gives. That it's not threatening, but warm and soft and full of refuge, like an embrace, like a blanket, like the voice of someone saying, 'Sleep now. Rest. I'm watching.'" Outside, at the very edge of the sky, it grows lighter, very slowly, very gently. A thin stripe of grey settling over the horizon, like a promise whispered. The morning comes. Not now, not yet, but it comes. It always comes. But not yet. It's still night. The train still runs. The wheels still rattle. Ta-dun, ta-dun. Ever quieter, ever slower. And the stories rest in me, like seeds in earth, like sounds in a bell, like colors in molten glass. Bells that ring over mountains and valleys, a forest that breathes, threads that weave together, a blue point in the dark, glass that shimmers, a bridge that holds, herbs that smell, and a lantern that glows, so small, so warm in the night. Only the rattle now, only the breath, only the silence, and the morning that can wait, that always can wait, because the night isn't finished with me, not yet. Only sleep now, only sleep.